He doesn't belong here." The words sliced through the hushed atmosphere of the boutique like a blade, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. Sebastian felt every eye in the room turn toward him, the weight of their judgment pressing against his chest. He'd spent 3 years crafting the intricate mechanisms inside these watches, yet now stood frozen as the store manager's manicured finger pointed toward the exit. The exclusive launch party continued around him, champagne glasses clinking as wealthy patrons admired the timepieces he had poured his soul into creating. Watches he apparently wasn't worthy to touch. In his simple white shirt and worn blazer, the best he owned, Sebastian had become a spectacle, an entertainer for the elite gathering who now exchanged knowing smiles at his expense. What they didn't notice was the man in the corner, wearing sunglasses despite the dimmed lighting, who had stopped mid-conversation, his attention now fully captured by the unfolding scene. The Chronos Infinity Collection represented the pinnacle of luxury watchmaking, only 50 pieces created worldwide, each priced at more than most people's homes. The boutique had been transformed for tonight's exclusive preview. Crystal chandeliers casting a golden glow over glass display cases, security personnel positioned discreetly at every corner, champagne flowing as freely as the compliments exchanged between people who measured worth in brand names. Sebastian had received no invitation. After years hunched over a workbench in the company's workshop, hands steady as he assembled microscopic components with the precision of a surgeon, he had simply wanted to see the finished products being celebrated. The manager's voice had risen with each word, performing now for his audience of potential buyers. "This event is strictly invitation only," he continued, adjusting his perfectly tailored suit jacket. "I'm sure you understand that these timepieces are for a certain caliber of client." His emphasis on the last word made its meaning clear. People with money, not people with skill. A woman nearby captured the humiliation on her phone, barely concealing her amusement. Sebastian's fingers, calloused from years of delicate work, curled into fists at his sides. 3 years of his life ticked away inside those gleaming cases, each watch containing countless hours of his dedication, his passion, his artistry. Yet here he stood, deemed unworthy even to witness their unveiling. The manager had placed a firm hand on Sebastian's shoulder, guiding him toward the exit with the practiced discretion of someone accustomed to removing unwanted elements from view. "Perhaps you could come back during regular hours with the general public," he suggested, voice dripping with condescension. Something shifted in the atmosphere then, a current of attention redirecting as the man in sunglasses set down his champagne flute with deliberate care. As he removed his designer sunglasses, gasps of recognition rippled through the crowd. Robert Downey Jr., whose iconic portrayal of Tony Stark had made him the very embodiment of brilliant creators unbound by convention, stepped forward, his expression unreadable, but his purpose clear. The story of what happened next would be remembered long after the limited edition watches had lost their luster. Time seemed to slow as Robert Downey Jr. moved through the crowd, which parted before him like water. He carried himself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms far more imposing than this boutique. There was something in his walk, deliberate yet relaxed, that drew all eyes away from Sebastian's humiliation and toward whatever was about to unfold. The manager's face transformed in an instant, professional disdain melting into starstruck recognition. "Mr. Downey, what an honor to have you join us tonight. I'd be happy to show you our premier pieces personally," he gushed, already abandoning Sebastian to pivot toward the celebrity. Sebastian remained frozen, unsure whether to continue his retreat or witness whatever was unfolding. His mind raced back to the workshop where he'd spent countless hours perfecting the balance wheels, adjusting escapements with microscopic precision, assembling the intricate constellation of gears that brought each timepiece to life. Each watch contained a piece of himself, his vision, dedication, and craftsmanship, now locked behind glass for people who would never understand the poetry of their mechanics. The boutique's lighting had been designed to make everything glitter: the watches, the jewelry, the people who could afford them. It caught the subtle texture of Downey's expertly tailored jacket, the polished marble floors, the crystal champagne flutes. Yet what it illuminated most clearly at this moment was the stark division between those who created value and those who claimed ownership of it. The wealthy patrons watched expectantly, phones discreetly raised to capture a potential celebrity moment, entirely unaware that they were about to witness something more authentic than they had anticipated. "I'm actually interested in meeting this gentleman," Robert said, gesturing toward Sebastian with a casual motion that nonetheless carried unmistakable authority. His voice was quiet, yet somehow filled the space, trained through decades of delivering lines that resonated with millions. The manager's expression flickered between confusion and alarm, his social algorithm frantically recalculating the situation. "Of course, Mr. Downey, but he's just one of our craftsmen," the manager explained with a nervous laugh. "I can assure you that our head designer would be much more informative about the collection." Robert's eyebrow arched slightly, a micro-expression so subtle yet so familiar from his films that several guests unconsciously smiled in anticipation. He turned his full attention to Sebastian, ignoring the manager's attempt at redirection. "You helped create these watches?" The question was simple, direct, delivered with genuine interest rather than the performative enthusiasm that permeated most interactions in spaces like this. Sebastian nodded, finding his voice despite the surreal situation. "Yes, sir. I worked on the movement assembly and finishing for most of the collection." His hands, the true tools of his trade, remained at his sides, hands that could manipulate components so small they required magnification to see, yet were deemed unworthy to touch the final product. The crowd's attention had transformed. What had begun as voyeuristic entertainment, watching someone being put in their place, had evolved into something uncertain. Phone cameras still recorded, but their owners' expressions had shifted from amusement to curiosity. The manager remained beside them, his professional smile stretched thin over growing unease as the power dynamic he understood so well began to tilt in an unfamiliar direction. "Movement assembly," Robert repeated thoughtfully, as though testing the words. "So, you're essentially building the heart of each watch." He gestured toward the display cases. "Which ones did you work on personally?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Sebastian hesitated, acutely aware of the manager's growing discomfort beside him. The truth was simple, but somehow dangerous in this environment. He had worked on all of them. Every single watch in the Chronos Infinity collection contained his craftsmanship, his problem-solving, his dedication to perfection that no customer would ever see beneath the gleaming exterior. "I contributed to each piece in the collection, Mr. Downey," Sebastian finally answered, his voice gaining strength as he spoke about his work. "Each movement requires approximately 80 hours of hand assembly and adjustment to achieve the precision standards." A murmur rippled through the gathered guests. 80 hours, 2 full work weeks, spent on internal components that would remain hidden beneath elegant dials and cases. Components that made the watches function but weren't part of the marketing story, the visible luxury that justified their price tags. Robert nodded slowly, his gaze moving from Sebastian to the watches and back again. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of someone who understood both craftsmanship and celebrity, having mastered both worlds. "Interesting how we celebrate the objects but not their creators." There was no judgment in his tone, just a simple observation that somehow cut through the boutique's carefully cultivated atmosphere. The manager shifted his weight, social instincts warning him of dangerous territory. "Mr. Downey, would you like to see our signature piece? We've reserved number 1 of 50 for a special client, but I'd be honored to show it to you." His words tumbled out too quickly, a transparent attempt to divert the conversation back to comfortable ground where watches were luxury commodities rather than the product of human skill and dedication. Robert's smile didn't reach his eyes as he responded to the manager. "Actually, I'd like to see these watches through the eyes of someone who understands what makes them tick." He turned back to Sebastian. "Would you mind showing me your favorite piece in the collection?" The question landed like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples of tension through the boutique. Sebastian glanced at the manager, whose expression had hardened into a mask of professional courtesy stretched thin over panic. This wasn't how these events were choreographed to unfold. The watchmakers remained invisible, their labor transformed into brand mythology rather than human achievement. "I believe Sebastian's shift ended some time ago," the manager interjected smoothly, "and our security protocols for handling the collection are quite strict. Perhaps our brand ambassador could—" "I'm asking him," Robert interrupted, his tone pleasant, but brooking no argument. The celebrity removed his designer jacket and draped it casually over a nearby chair, a simple action that somehow made him seem more authentic amid the carefully curated luxury surrounding them. These protocols, do they prevent the very people who built these watches from handling them? The gathered crowd was fully engaged now, their attention locked on the unfolding drama. What had begun as an uncomfortable class confrontation had evolved into something more compelling, a moment of genuine human interaction cutting through the artificial environment of the boutique. Several guests had positioned themselves for better viewing angles, phones capturing what was quickly becoming a viral moment in the making. Sebastian straightened his posture, years of professional pride surfacing through his embarrassment. "The celestial chronograph is my favorite," he said, addressing Robert directly, while pointedly ignoring the manager's attempt to silence him. "It features a moon phase complication that required particular precision to execute correctly." Robert nodded encouragingly. "Show me." The invitation, or perhaps it was a challenge, hung in the air between them. Sebastian hesitated, conscious of the invisible lines he had already crossed simply by attending the event. The manager's expression had transformed into something that promised consequences, but Robert Downey Jr.'s presence created a temporary shield of celebrity influence. The patrons watched with rapt attention, sensing that the refined veneer of the evening was being stripped away to reveal something more authentic beneath. With a subtle sense of defiance, Sebastian stepped toward the central display case where the celestial chronograph gleamed beneath precisely angled lighting. The security guard stationed nearby looked questioningly at the manager, who reluctantly nodded his permission while maintaining his strained smile. The room had grown unnaturally quiet, the ambient music suddenly noticeable in the absence of conversation. "Sir, if you'll allow me," the manager said, moving to unlock the display case himself, a final attempt to maintain control of the situation. "Let him do it," Robert said firmly. "I want to see how someone who actually built these watches handles them." The manager's keys jingled slightly in his trembling hand as he unlocked the case, then stepped back with visible reluctance. Sebastian approached with the reverence of someone entering a sacred space. His movements were practiced and precise as he reached for the watch, a stunning creation of platinum and sapphire crystal that retailed for more than many people would earn in 5 years. "We developed a modified escapement for this model," Sebastian explained, as he carefully lifted the timepiece, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke about his craft. "It increases accuracy while maintaining a 72-hour power reserve." His fingers, the same fingers that had assembled its heart, cradled the watch with expertise that no amount of sales training could replicate. Robert moved closer, genuinely interested. "That sounds impressive, though I'll admit, most of those terms are beyond me." A small, authentic smile touched Sebastian's lips for the first time that evening. The escapement is essentially the watch's heartbeat. Each tick you hear is the escapement releasing energy in precise intervals. He turned the watch gently, allowing light to play across its surface. "We had to redesign it 3 times before achieving the precision we wanted." "We?" Robert inquired with raised eyebrows. Sebastian's smile faltered slightly. "Well, I developed the modified design with our technical director." The manager cleared his throat. "Our design team works collaboratively on all innovations," he interjected, attempting to reclaim the narrative. A woman in the crowd, wearing jewelry worth more than Sebastian's annual salary, stepped forward with unexpected interest. "You designed components as well as assembling them?" Her question carried none of the condescension that had permeated the earlier interactions, just genuine curiosity. Sebastian nodded, his focus still on the watch in his hands. This particular complication took nearly 6 months to perfect. His thumb brushed over the crown, the connection between the user and the mechanical poetry inside. In that moment, the distinction between creator and consumer had never been more pronounced. More guests had gathered around now, drawn by the unusual spectacle of a craftsman discussing his work amid the typical salesmanship of luxury retail. Sebastian's passion was evident as he demonstrated how the moon phase complication worked, explaining the mathematical precision required to ensure it would remain accurate for centuries. The technical complexity underneath the beautiful exterior, typically relegated to specification sheets and marketing materials, was suddenly the center of attention. "What's most remarkable," Sebastian continued, gaining confidence with each word, "is that this mechanism will still be keeping perfect time long after we're gone. A mechanical watch doesn't become obsolete like digital technology. With proper care, it's essentially immortal." Robert watched with evident appreciation, not for the luxury object itself, but for the human ingenuity it represented. "So you're creating something that outlives its creator," he observed. "There's something profound about that." The crowd had transformed from passive consumers to engaged listeners, their attention captured by authenticity in an environment typically defined by its absence. Even those who had initially smirked at Sebastian's discomfort were now watching with interest, their phones capturing a moment of unexpected substance amid the champagne and canapes. The manager, sensing his loss of control over the evening, made another attempt to redirect. "Perhaps we should allow other guests to view the collection as well. Sebastian, thank you for your time, but—" "Actually," Robert interjected, his celebrity status carrying undeniable authority, "I'd like to see more. Sebastian, what other pieces did you work on personally?" The question was an unambiguous transfer of power. The manager's authority had been politely but firmly overridden, celebrity influence reshaping the social hierarchy of the room. Guests who had moments ago been actively participating in Sebastian's humiliation were now eagerly awaiting his expertise, the social current completely reversed. Sebastian carefully returned the celestial chronograph to its display, then moved toward another case containing the collection's most technically complex piece. "The grand complication was perhaps our greatest challenge," he said, indicating a masterpiece of watchmaking that featured a perpetual calendar, split-second chronograph, and minute repeater. It contains over 600 individual components, each finished by hand. As Sebastian continued his impromptu tour, the atmosphere in the boutique underwent a remarkable transformation. The craftsman who had been deemed unwelcome was now the center of attention, his knowledge more valuable than the practiced sales pitches that usually dominated such events. And through it all, Robert Downey Jr. remained by his side, asking insightful questions that revealed his own appreciation for craftsmanship over status. The manager stood at the periphery, his expression cycling through confusion, frustration, and calculation as he watched the unexpected scenario unfold. The evening had veered dramatically off script, social media potential building with each passing moment as phones continued to capture the scene. What had begun as an attempt to preserve the boutique's exclusive atmosphere had transformed into something far more interesting and potentially damaging to the carefully cultivated brand image. As Sebastian concluded his explanation of the grand complication, Robert's expression shifted subtly, the practiced mask of celebrity politeness giving way to something more genuine. He glanced around the boutique, taking in the rapt faces of the wealthy patrons who had, just 30 minutes earlier, been content to watch a craftsman being escorted from their presence. "You know what fascinates me about watches?" Robert said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the space. "They're one of the few luxury items that are still made by human hands, not assembled in factories, but actually created by artisans." He turned to address the gathered crowd directly. "We're standing in a room full of objects that represent thousands of hours of human dedication, skill passed down through generations, and mathematical precision that borders on art. Yet until now, none of us thought to ask about the people who actually created them." The observation landed with quiet force. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of their participation in a system that rendered craftsmanship invisible while elevating consumption as achievement. The manager's smile had become fixed, his eyes darting between Robert, Sebastian, and the increasingly engaged audience. "Sebastian," Robert continued, "correct me if I'm wrong, but these watches will sell for, what, $40,000, $50,000 each?" "The grand complication is priced at $120,000, the manager interjected reflexively, then immediately regretted drawing attention to himself. Robert nodded slowly. $120,000. And if I may ask, Sebastian, without getting too personal, what's the typical salary for someone in your position?" The question hung in the air like crystal stemware about to shatter. Sebastian hesitated, awareness of professional consequences warring with the unusual power dynamic of the moment. The truth was stark and would normally remain unspoken in such company. His annual salary was less than half the price of the least expensive watch in the collection he had helped create. "Our compensation packages are confidential," the manager interjected sharply, protective instincts finally overriding his deference to celebrity. "I wasn't asking you," Robert replied, his tone pleasant but firm. He maintained eye contact with Sebastian, creating a bubble of authentic connection amid the artificial environment. Sebastian straightened his shoulders, making a decision. "Watchmakers in my position typically earn between $60,000 and $70,000 a year, Mr. Downey." A ripple of reaction moved through the crowd, not shock at the figure itself, which many of them spent on weekend getaways, but at the stark disparity it revealed. The watches suddenly existed in a new context, not just as luxury objects, but as the product of human labor that was valued at a fraction of their selling price. Robert nodded thoughtfully, absorbing the information without judgment. "So the hands that create these masterpieces are valued at a fraction of what the finished products sell for." It wasn't a question, but an observation, delivered with the perfect timing of an actor who understood the power of a well-placed statement. "The brand creates the value," the manager stated, attempting to reassert control of the narrative. "Our heritage, our marketing, our client relationships, these are what position these timepieces as luxury investments." "Interesting perspective," Robert replied, his eyes never leaving Sebastian. "What do you think about that, as someone who actually builds them?" The boutique had fallen completely silent. Even the background music seemed to have paused, as though the sound system itself was waiting for Sebastian's response. The young watchmaker looked around at the faces turned toward him, no longer seeing him as an intruder, but as someone whose perspective suddenly mattered. "I think," Sebastian began carefully, "that both elements have value. The brand creates the opportunity, but without skilled craftsmen, there would be nothing to sell." He gestured toward the watches displayed around them. "These aren't luxury because of advertising or heritage alone. They're luxury because they represent human excellence, hundreds of years of accumulated knowledge and skill, distilled into objects that will outlive all of us." His words resonated through the space, eloquent despite their simplicity. Several guests nodded in agreement, perspectives visibly shifting as they considered the human dimension of luxury they had previously reduced to status symbols. Robert smiled with genuine appreciation. "Well said." He turned back to the manager. "I'm curious, do your craftspeople ever get to attend events like this, meet the clients who will own their creations?" The manager's composure was slipping, professional veneer cracking under the unexpected scrutiny. "Our events are curated specifically for clients and investors. The production team has separate—" "So that's a no," Robert interrupted gently. A woman wearing diamond earrings worth more than Sebastian's car spoke up unexpectedly. "I would actually love to meet more of the people who make these watches. It adds another dimension to the ownership experience." Several other guests murmured agreement, the social current shifting visibly. What had begun as an uncomfortable confrontation had evolved into a legitimate questioning of industry practices that suddenly seemed outdated. Phones were still recording, capturing a moment that would soon circulate far beyond the boutique's walls. The manager's expression cycled through several emotions before settling on a strained professional smile. "Perhaps we could consider that for future events," he conceded, recognizing the need to adapt to the rapidly changing situation. "Excellent idea," Robert affirmed, then turned back to Sebastian. "You know, I've been looking for a new timepiece, something special." His gaze swept the room before returning to the watchmaker. "But I'd rather buy it from the person who created it than someone who just sells it." The implication of Robert's statement hung in the air, impossible to ignore. He wasn't just expressing interest in a watch, he was publicly redefining the value system of the entire room. By stating his preference to purchase directly from the craftsman, he had elevated creation above sales, substance above status, humanity above exclusivity. "Mr. Downey," the manager began, panic finally breaking through his professional facade, "our sales protocols require—" "I'm sure we can make an exception," interrupted a sharp voice from across the room. Heads turned to see an elegant, older woman approaching. Sebastian immediately recognized her as Victoria Harrington, the CEO of the watch company. Her unexpected presence created a new ripple of tension. She hadn't been announced, suggesting she had been observing the evening's events unnoticed. "Ms. Harrington," the manager stammered, "I was just explaining our standard procedures, which clearly need revision," she said crisply, coming to stand beside Sebastian and Robert. Her gaze swept over the gathered crowd before settling on the watchmaker. "Sebastian, I don't believe we've been properly introduced, though I'm familiar with your work. Your modifications to the escapement mechanism were quite brilliant." Sebastian's expression registered surprise that the CEO not only knew who he was, but was familiar with his specific contributions. "Thank you, ma'am." Victoria turned to address Robert. "Mr. Downey, I apologize for tonight's misunderstanding. The truth is, companies like ours have traditionally kept our artisans behind the scenes, which I'm now realizing is both outdated and counterproductive." She gestured toward the watches displayed around them. "These timepieces tell stories, not just the brand story we market, but the human stories of their creation." Robert's expression warmed with genuine appreciation. "That's exactly it." Victoria turned back to the crowd, seizing the moment with the confidence of a leader recognizing an opportunity for transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we've all witnessed something important tonight. Our company has always prided itself on excellence, but perhaps we've been celebrating the wrong aspects of our own creation. She moved to stand beside Sebastian, her presence elevating rather than diminishing him. Starting tonight, we're implementing a new approach. Each Chronos Infinity watch will now be delivered with documentation about the specific artisans who created it, their names, their expertise, their contribution to its existence. The announcement sent a murmur through the crowd, surprise mingled with approval. What had begun as an uncomfortable class confrontation had somehow transformed into a moment of authentic evolution. Victoria wasn't just doing damage control, she was recognizing and embracing a necessary change. And, she continued, her gaze returning to Sebastian, I believe our watchmakers should indeed be present at events like these. After all, who better to explain the soul of our timepieces than those who breathe life into them? The room erupted in applause, genuine rather than perfunctory. Even those who had initially participated in Sebastian's humiliation were now caught up in the moment's authenticity. Phone cameras continued to record what had become not just a viral incident, but a meaningful cultural shift playing out in real time. Robert extended his hand to Sebastian, no longer just a celebrity making a point, but one creator acknowledging another. I still want that watch, he said with a warm smile. But now I'll know exactly whose craftsmanship I'm wearing. By the following morning, videos of the encounter had spread across social media platforms with the velocity that only authentic moments can achieve. Clips of Robert Downey Jr. championing the watchmaker, the CEO's unexpected announcement, and Sebastian's passionate explanation of his craft had been viewed millions of times. The hashtag number Know Your Creator was trending, sparking conversations about the invisible hands behind luxury goods across industries. Sebastian arrived at the workshop to find his colleagues gathered around phones and tablets, watching the viral videos with expressions ranging from amazement to vindication. The atmosphere had transformed overnight, the typically quiet space now buzzing with energy and possibility. When he reached his workbench, he found a handwritten note from Victoria Harrington requesting his presence in the executive offices that afternoon. "You're famous," remarked Antoine, an older watchmaker who had mentored Sebastian during his apprenticeship. There was pride in his voice rather than envy. "And you represented us well." Sebastian shook his head, still processing the previous night's events. "I just spoke about the work, that's all." "That's exactly what needed to happen," Antoine replied, his weathered hands continuing their delicate task even as they spoke. "For too long, we've been hidden away like some trade secret, as though the magic would disappear if customers knew actual people created these watches." Throughout the morning, other craftspeople stopped by Sebastian's station, not to discuss the celebrity encounter, but to thank him for articulating the dignity of their work. Each expressed the same sentiment in different ways. He had given voice to what they all felt, but had never been able to say in the company's carefully separated world, where creation and consumption were kept deliberately distant from each other. At precisely 2 o'clock, Sebastian made his way to the executive floor, a space he had never visited despite years with the company. The contrast with the workshop was striking. Where his domain was functional and focused on creation, this environment was designed to impress, to convey status and success. Yet today, those symbols of corporate hierarchy seemed somehow less substantial than the skill in his hands. Victoria's assistant ushered him directly into her office, where he was surprised to find not just the CEO, but several members of the executive team seated around a conference table. Their expressions were not of reprimand, but of interest. The dynamic had fundamentally shifted. "Sebastian," Victoria began, gesturing to an empty chair, "thank you for joining us. I imagine this has been an unusual 24 hours for you." He nodded, acutely aware of being out of his element, yet somehow no longer intimidated by it. "Yes, ma'am." "What happened last night has created an unexpected opportunity," she continued, turning a tablet to show him social media analytics. "The public response has been overwhelmingly positive. People are responding to the authenticity, to the human story behind our products." The marketing director leaned forward. "We've had more engagement in the past 12 hours than in our last 3 campaigns combined. And it's not just passive views. People are having meaningful conversations about craftsmanship, value, and recognition." Sebastian listened, still processing the scale of what had been set in motion by his simple desire to see the finished watches he had helped create. "We've been discussing a significant shift in our approach," Victoria continued, "starting with the Chronos Infinity collection, but extending to all our products moving forward. We want to bring our craftspeople out of the shadows." The company's creative director turned his laptop toward Sebastian, showing preliminary designs for a new presentation case. "Each watch will come with a detailed portfolio of its creation journey, including profiles of the key artisans involved. We're thinking photographs, background stories, even personal notes from the craftspeople about their specific contribution." He scrolled through several concept images. Customers aren't just buying an object, they're buying the culmination of human expertise and passion. The room waited for Sebastian's reaction, his perspective suddenly valued in a way it had never been before. The notion was revolutionary, yet somehow obvious, connecting the owners of luxury timepieces with the human stories of their creation added dimensions of value that no marketing campaign could fabricate. "We'd like you to be the face of this initiative," Victoria said directly. "Not just because of last night, but because you clearly have the ability to articulate the soul of what we do. We're creating a new position, Master Craftsman Ambassador, to bridge the world of creation and consumption." Sebastian considered the proposal, aware of its significance. This wasn't just a promotion. It was an opportunity to transform how the entire industry approached craftsmanship and recognition. "Would I still be creating watches?" he asked, unwilling to surrender the hands-on work that defined him. Victoria smiled. "Absolutely, that's essential. You'll divide your time between the workshop and engaging with clients, the media, and our retail partners. We want authentic representation, not another polished spokesperson." The Human Resources Director slid a document across the table, a contract with compensation figures that made Sebastian momentarily dizzy. It represented not just financial validation, but recognition of worth that extended beyond his technical skills to encompass his ability to communicate the value of craftsmanship itself. "Mr. Downey has already confirmed his purchase," the sales director added, "but he specifically requested that you personally deliver the watch and explain its mechanics directly. He's also expressed interest in visiting our workshop, an opportunity we've never offered to clients before." 3 months later, Sebastian stood in the reimagined boutique space, now transformed to showcase both the watches and the craftsmanship behind them. Glass walls had replaced the solid barriers that once separated the small workshop area from the sales floor, allowing clients to witness watchmaking in progress. Display cases now featured not just the timepieces, but photographs and stories of their creators. The change was more than aesthetic. It represented a fundamental shift in how value was defined and presented. Tonight's event was the official launch of the Artisan Series, the company's new approach to connecting creators with consumers. Sebastian adjusted his cuffs, no longer wearing a borrowed blazer, but a well-tailored suit that represented his dual role as craftsman and ambassador. Around him, a diverse group mingled, collectors and creators sharing space as equals rather than occupying separate worlds. "There he is," came a familiar voice, and Sebastian turned to see Robert Downey Jr. approaching, wearing the celestial chronograph on his wrist. The actor extended his hand with genuine warmth. The man who started a revolution? Sebastian smiled, still not entirely comfortable with his newfound recognition, but growing into it. I just wanted to see the watches. And now everyone gets to see the watchmakers, Robert replied, gesturing around the transformed space. That's how change happens. One person standing their ground at the right moment. Across the room, Sebastian spotted the manager who had attempted to remove him from the original event. Rather than termination, the company had invested in retraining their retail staff to understand and appreciate the technical aspects of watchmaking. The man now stood conversing comfortably with Antoine, having learned that knowledge of craftsmanship enhanced rather than diminished the luxury sales experience. Victoria joined them, champagne flutes in hand. "The response has been remarkable," she said, passing the glasses to Sebastian and Robert. "Sales are up 23%, but more importantly, the nature of client engagement has transformed. People aren't just buying status symbols, they're investing in human excellence." Sebastian nodded, understanding completely. The watches remained luxury items with exclusive price tags, but their value proposition had fundamentally shifted, from objects of conspicuous consumption to celebrations of human achievement and artistry. The invisible wall between creators and consumers hadn't just been breached, it had been deliberately dismantled. "To knowing the hands behind what we value," Robert proposed, raising his glass in a toast. As their glasses clinked, Sebastian reflected on how much had changed in a single season. He would return to his workbench tomorrow, continuing to create with the same dedication he always had. But now those creations would carry not just his craftsmanship, but his identity into the world, connecting him to the people who would cherish the products of his skill long after he had moved on to his next creation. The true luxury, he had discovered, wasn't in owning something exclusive, it was in understanding and appreciating the human excellence that brought it into being. And that recognition, unlike the watches themselves, was a value that would never depreciate with time.